Hey, welcome to our 17th edition of Rethinking Trauma and Transition.
Welcome indeed.
At Rethinking Trauma and Transition, we challenge the stigma surrounding trauma and healing through our podcast. We aim to empower those who are experiencing these challenges, providing them with the knowledge and language necessary to embark on a transformative journey towards a more fulfilling life.
So you've been doing a bit of reading this week, haven't you?
Yeah, I can just about read, yeah.
I know that sounded like it was unusual, it's far from it. But the reason I'm noting it is because that's what kind of sparked some of our conversation that we're about to have, isn't it?
Yeah. And it was also that with a client of mine, so we're talking about comparisons. So I was working with a client of mine, and he was saying his experience of what he went through wasn't as bad as somebody else's. My answer to that was, how do you know? My question to him was, how do you know? Are you a mind reader? Have you lived his life?
So that led, I take it, to that concept of comparisons and the impact comparisons have on us.
Yeah. So what I read out is like 2 paragraphs from the book, The Tao of Fully Healing, Harvesting Forgiveness Out of Blame. So what he says here is, the rational mind can be a tremendous obstacle to recovery. When its logic and reason are enlisted in the service of denial, the thinking mind finds innumerable reasons and ways to short-circuit the grieving process. Americans are very practiced at convincing themselves that their pain should be dismissed. They routinely trivialize and dismiss their hurts and losses by comparing them to more dramatic misfortunes of others. Starving children and homeless people are routinely invoked as reasons for disavowing painful feelings. So what happens is somebody may be involved in a car accident, and they get some injuries. And with these injuries, they may be, say, in hospital for a week, and then they'll get, say, a doctor or a family friend or whomever come in, and they say, oh, could have been worse. You could have been a quadriplegic. So that is denying somebody's healing process, the event that somebody went through and gone through, and saying, oh, you could have had it much more worse, which denies that person's emotions, that denies that person can heal from that experience and that kind of thing.
What strikes me is that when these phrases are used, the deliverer of that phrase will often think they're being helpful.
Yeah.
Because when I think about that, what occurs to me is that in discounting our experiences or someone else's, there is other emotions that are attached with that experience, such as shame and guilt. We're too ashamed to challenge that, or we feel guilty that we are actually feeling these and experiencing these, because there's a sense of
I think there's also is survivor's guilt. So I didn't suffer as much as somebody else, so maybe a bit of martyrdom in there. I could have had it much. I wish it was me and not you taking that. They want to take that responsibility off someone else, and they want to be in that person's place.
Yeah, because survivor's guilt is quite often that confusion of, why am I here and somebody else isn't? And in that comparison, I think it is that underplay, that discounting, there's a devaluing that goes on in there, in that experience.
So what Pete Walker also addressed in the book, Ali, is that he says, you've got termites in your house, but that's okay because not eating through it when the neighbours, their house is being practically eaten down by these termites. So they're, what they're going through, that's really bad, but it's okay. I got a small amount of termites and they're just doing their little thing, eating down the porch.
But that then also means, though, that in that underplay, in that discount, then we put extra barriers into our own healing.
Yeah, that's
To our
exactly
own
what it is.
recovery.
Hmm.
Because if we don't acknowledge it and we don't allow it in a way, then how do we take the right actions and the next steps to facilitate our healing if we're not even fully acknowledging what it is that we need to heal?
Mm-hmm. I guess the chances are people won't, because they're denying their own existence of that hurt and that harm that's happened to them.
Well, what also struck me was that in the delivery of those phrases sometimes, and you and I've talked about the trauma Olympics before, how there's almost that competitive element of, wait until and it can go both ways. So it can go either where you discount your experiences because it's not bad enough, which is very much about this comparison piece, or where you again get to that point of almost like in competition with the other person. You feel as though I've got to let them know how bad this actually was.
Yeah.
And I think that happens in conversation as well with these things, with that comparison element.
Oh, very much so.
But I'm wondering how much of that is also about a deflection away from conversations that people feel awkward having.
Yeah, quite potentially. Yeah. There was one chap I was working with a while ago now, and he had to believe he wasn't worthy of getting therapy. He had served in TA at the time, and he got his injury. He got post-traumatic stress, I think it was, and suffering from anxiety and things when he was on holiday, got run over. And because he hadn't served that long in the TA as it was there, and he got injured out on holiday somewhere in the world, he had a belief that he wasn't able to come and get therapy or help because of that experience. And I was like, don't be ridiculous. You've probably done more than most people who've actually served full time. And I think potentially me saying that was useful for him as well.
I think it's also, and I'm going to come back to those conversations again, because part and parcel of that avoidance sometimes, if you consider a conversation is a bit like a relay when you're playing tennis or a rally, is that backwards and forwards of the conversational ball across the net. And when we're throwing that emotional curveball from someone, we have a choice of whether we bat it back or whether we catch it, hold on to it, and go, tell me more. And catching that ball, that emotion, and saying, tell me more, a lot of people feel very uncomfortable with, because it's almost like, how long will I have to hold this for? Where will it go to? And how big will the ball get?
Yeah.
And will I be able to cope with it if it does? Yeah. So they bat it back.
Well, a typical British conversation is, how are you? I'm fine. Or I'm okay. Middle to fair into middle. Ain't not too bad. Yeah. Nobody really wants to delve in too deep as to what is going on in the world with them.
Yeah, how often does somebody say, how are you? And yet fine well that were you to suddenly turn around and go, well, actually, my day's been pretty crap, really, and everything's going horribly wrong for me, they would look like there was rabbits in the headlights. Yeah. So we get very practiced at that avoidance and that deflection and that discounting of our own emotions and those of others.
Yes.
And one gambit of doing that is the comparison.
It is, yeah.
Whether that's an internal one, that we compare ourselves to others and find ourselves less deserving than.
Or our belief is we're less deserving than.
Or whether that's externally given to us in that conversational rally as a deflection.
Yeah.
Why are people scared of those conversations, do you think?
That, Annie, is a damn good question. It's because nobody wants to hear them. Nobody's ready for those kind of conversations. British culture especially is stiff up lip and get on with it as best you can.
Do you think there's also an element of barter that goes on?
Go on.
So, yeah, where my thinking's going with that one is that it's almost kind of like, I'm not going to give you that space to explore that with me because I don't trust that you would give me that space back.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Or the converse, which is, if I give you that space, will you expect me to be that open with you too? And where am I sitting in terms of how vulnerable that will make me feel?
Mm-hmm. And that person as well you're wanting to express to, can they be trusted? And not go and jibber jabber to Tom, Dick, and Harry, as it were.
How far is far enough and how far is too far?
Mm.
Because I do think that's a genuine issue for a lot of us, because if we don't practice that, if we don't share of our emotions, of our experiences, there's almost like that blurt effect, isn't there? When you finally do. And then you suddenly look at somebody's face and think, oh, okay, that was too much, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
The eyes glaze over. And is that person really wanting to be in that conversation? Or they, as we've mentioned so many times before as well, are they listening to respond and not actually listening to listen? Are they ready for that judgment to go, because and just go on about completely out of context what you're talking about?
I read somewhere this week that, and I'm sure it was an article I was reading, where somebody was talking about a lesson they had learned with their children, where they now apply that throughout the life. And when somebody comes to them with an issue, or the conversation goes down a route where they're now in the sharing space, they say to that person, which ears would you like me to use? My listening ears or my fixing ears?
Yeah. I've heard sooner of that is, do you want me to listen or do you want me to help you solve it?
Yeah.
What do you want a solution for the problem? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so powerful because that takes some of the pressure off.
And this is going completely off tangent. What we were talking about is part of the conversation I was having with that chap was about the things that he had done, and is that, well, I've not done this and I've not done that. Again, comparison with other people. But I said, have you really thought and reflected on how far you've come, what you've achieved, what you've gone through, the people you've met, the places you've been, the things you've experienced? There's very, very few people in the world who've done that, who've done what you have done. And just have a little think and reflection on that and go out and celebrate in maybe just in your mind and go, hey, I've done a lot of really good stuff out there. I've been to a lot of wonderful places, met a lot of amazing people.
But that comes down to the judgments that we place on ourselves, isn't it? And our own sense of worth. And also the stories we create in our heads about other people.
Mm-hmm.
The assumptions and the things that are inferred, that we infer on them, the thoughts that we have in that moment about what they're probably thinking, when we could become the world-class mind reader that we all know we are, because obviously our thoughts are just really right. They're really bang on.
Well, you know what they say about assuming things, don't you?
No, tell me.
They can ask. Yeah.
But there's an awful lot of dialogue going on in that, and not all the conversations, the one that's going on between you and the other person. The conversation is going on between you and yourself. In your head about what you think they're thinking, what they think they're making decisions about, making judgments on. And actually, it shouldn't ever come down to a list of achievements. It should come down to, this is just what I'm experiencing just now.
No, what I was on about with all that stuff that this chap had done is that not really achieved much or done much with my life. You have, because you don't recognize that because you've been in that situation in those places. And so if you really stop and think about what, we're talking about comparisons, some ways comparison, there's a dichotomy there. Some ways comparisons are really good because you can assess where you are with, say, maybe work colleague, and look at yourself where they're doing better than what you are and ask them how to improve, kind of thing. But with other situations, it ain't too good. There are obviously things like post-traumatic stress or anxiety. Is my anxiety worse than my neighbour's anxiety? Is that a good comparison? Probably not. So I was asking him, all those little things and big things that you've done and all those people you've met, that's some really good stuff to be proud of.
I agree with you, because I think we often undermine our own achievements. We often don't see our achievements or acknowledge them because we feel awkward about it, because we don't want to appear vain or arrogant. And these are more stories that we're telling ourselves in our head and assumptions we're making about ourselves and other people and how they'll perceive that. But wound in amongst that is often those thinking that other people have done far more than me.
Yeah.
Have been hurt far worse than me, or have things far whatever than me. And I suppose a lot of that for me comes back to the phrase that has wound its way through a lot of our episodes, which is, it's not about the event, it's about the impact.
It's the way I'm thinking about the event is.
Because when we're sharing in that moment, we're sharing about the impact, and that's unique to each individual, whether it's a broken leg or something far different.
What they used to do in the police force was you could have, say, 4 police officers walking, investigating a crime scene or whatever the incident was, and they'd all come back and all their reports would be exactly the same. It wasn't until several years later that lawyers are going, this is impossible. You cannot have 4 police officers writing exactly the same report as each other, because everybody would have a different perspective. Somebody might be facing away, somebody might not have heard something, somebody might have heard something else. People don't see and cannot be in the same exact physical space as somebody else. So it's all about our viewpoint, what we witnessed at that particular time.
So that really underlines the fact that comparisons are pointless.
Yes and no. As I said earlier, is, say, in a work or if you're in a sport, comparisons could be quite good to compare yourself where you are with the other person in a healthy kind of way. So you can use that other person as competition. So you look at, or go back to the old Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger films. They were comparing themselves to each other, going, oh, he's made a better film than I have. Oh, no, he's made a better film than I have. So that then compelled them to make bigger and better films. That enabled that competition. But all that being said, as I mentioned earlier, if somebody's got an injury, somebody is suffering from something, then comparing yourself to somebody else isn't good. It depends how healthy and where that comparison is.
So in some ways, what we're talking about is how we set our goals, what we use as our measures. And I'm wondering if actually, in terms of, for instance, like a positive goal and performance measurement and that sort of stuff, what we should be measuring ourselves against is ourselves, so that we're constantly striving to improve and get better rather than somebody else.
Agreed. Having that healthy competition and comparing where you are to somebody else, that can be useful, that can be quite healthy, but not become so obsessed with it
that it causes you harm.
Yeah.
I'm still not going to start playing board games though, because if I can't win, I'm not playing. But yeah, I do struggle to lose to small children. It's really bad. So those comparisons, Rich, I suppose it's about how much they limit our capacity to heal and how much negativity that we attribute to ourselves with them. So in other words, do we use them to beat ourselves up or drive ourselves forward?
Yeah. How healthy is it really?
Yeah. So does that mean then there should be almost, we should have a health check on them that says, what's this comparison doing for me now?
Yeah.
Is it increasing or giving me a negative emotion and feeling in response? Is it making me feel less than? Or is it motivating me to be more than?
Well, is it coming from that comparison? Is that coming from somebody else saying, oh, you're lucky you survived that? You're lucky you just had a broken leg.
I don't like the word just. It's one of those words I would love to
Minimize.
remove from the English language, because I think it's such a
Minimizing word, isn't it?
yeah, uh-huh. It instantly minimizes and shrinks something, and it minimizes, it shrinks, it devalues. And that is just a broken leg. You should be grateful.
Yeah, you did have a leg amputated, or whatever injury it could have been.
It stops an expression from that person of what they are experiencing, of what they're struggling with.
I'm sure you may have been told similarly is you'd be having dinner or tea, whatever you call it, and they go, oh, I don't really like this food. And then your parents could turn around and say, there's starving children in Ethiopia who'd be glad of this meal. Again, it's that unhealthy comparison, forcing somebody to have something they're not really wanting to eat.
But that comes down to what the comparison is delivering for us, isn't it? And I suppose, in a way, that comparison is getting compliance from us through the delivery of guilt and shame. I suppose, in a way, for me, that means that this conversation is almost like a health check for people, isn't it? To say, be careful about how you compare and when you compare.
And what language you use as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as we mentioned, the word just. Are you using that to minimize your own experience or that of other people's?
And both can be equally damaging.
Very much so, yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there are times when using just is really helpful.
If it's a sale or something on at a shop, that can be quite useful.
And but the majority of the time it's not helpful at all. So what do we want people to take away from this conversation, Rick?
I think it's about, as I mentioned before, is how healthy are you using that comparison and in what way? And are you allowing yourself or others to diminish your own experiences from that of other people's? Because even though somebody else may have gone through a horrendous experience, it doesn't invalidate the experience that you've gone through.
And I suppose there's also that element about health checking when we find ourselves saying what we think is a helpful phrase in the moment, and almost that, actually, is this actually helpful, or are we devaluing the other person's experience?
Yeah.
Because is it not better to acknowledge their experience and give them the space without that comparison? Because really, what does the comparison serve in that moment?
They're not useful.
No. In a way, they're unnecessary words in a conversation.
So just be careful where your termites are.
And recognize that your termite infection is just as bad or just as worthy of attention as anybody else's.
Yeah, you might want to see a doctor about that.
Well, not for termites. I think that's rent-a-kill. But it's more in the US than it is in the UK.
Yeah. Well, another analogy could be your house is on fire. There's a little flame going up the curtain. Well, next to us, house is full of flame.
It's only a little flame. It'll be fine.
Be all right. Don't worry about it.
But from small flames being big blazes. Yeah. So is there anything else we want people to take away from today?
No, I think that's pretty good.
So what have we covered off then?
what we covered off is how useful it is comparing yourself to others.
The devaluing
Yeah.
and the discounting that sometimes occurs.
Have a reflection and look back and look at the things that you've achieved, that you've been and done. It doesn't have to be, excuse me, climbing K2 or traversing the North Pole naked with with a half a sledge or something, does it? No one edit that bit out. And,
Might have to leave it in, Rich.
I mean, it doesn't have to be. It can be, if you're somebody suffering with depression or anxiety, it can be just getting out of bed in the morning.
And I think that's important to acknowledge, because just as each person's experience of an event, each person's response is unique, then that's about not underestimating or assuming we know how much effort it takes for something that we might take for granted.
Yeah.
Because we are not that other person.
Mind reading, Ali. Mind reading.
Mind reading, yeah. So stop mind reading. Stop assuming and stop comparing.
Or do your best not to.
Yeah. And if there is a comparison, then stop and consider whether or not that comparison is driving you forward or shutting you down and closing you down.
So if you do enjoy our podcast, you can find us on iTunes, and please do like, rate, review, and all that sort of good stuff.
And Spotify and Amazon Music.
Yeah.
And YouTube.
Yeah, indeed.
And if you want to have a conversation with either Rich or I about anything that we have spoken about, or you want to work with any one of us, then you can contact us on our Rethinking Trauma and Transition email, or you can contact us separately through our businesses. Rich is at Resilient Defence, and I'm at Mojo and Mind.
Excellent. And we look forward to Kinney's conversations.
Many more. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.